I think the great thing about being a gearhead is that it transcends gender, economic status, nationality, and race. I mean, anybody can be a gearhead, and you can like any kind of car you want. If you have the money, you can purchase a car of your very own to tinker on, fix up, and customize. Having a love of cars can make friends out of some who wouldn't, under any other circumstances, be friends. Unfortunately, here in the United States, we aren't always united, especially when it comes to race issues. Issues sometimes so deep that even being a gearhead couldn't overcome. This is a story of the unlikely partnership of Fred Stone, Tim Leonard Woods, and Doug Cook, and how they didn't allow skin color and the laws of the era to keep them from forming a friendship, a partnership, and ultimately the first integrated race team. My fellow gearheads, this is a brief history of Stone, Woods, and Cook, the first black-owned integrated drag racing team. It's the late 50s, and the United States is knee-deep in the civil rights movement. Black Americans were heavily oppressed by segregation laws of the South, otherwise known as Jim Crow. Conditions of the South were so bad that those blacks who had the means relocated to northern parts of the country or out west to California, where even though Jim Crow still existed there, provided a somewhat better environment that allowed blacks to prosper, build up their own businesses, and thrive, but separately. Tim Woods was one of those successful black business owners. In the late 50s, Tim was the owner of Woods Construction, the largest minority-owned construction company in the West, and the second largest in the United States. Right about that time, gassers were starting to get real popular in drag racing. Sharing a love for drag racing, especially gassers, Tim Woods partnered up with Fred Stone, the manager of Tim's construction company, to form a race team. Again, California was a much better environment for black Americans in spite of Jim Crow. However, even though Woods and Stone had a car to race, they couldn't drive it at the local track because blacks weren't allowed to drive on the drag strip. In order to get their car on the track, they had to hire a white driver and watch from the stands, wherever that was for blacks to watch. In 1961, with Pittman driving, they won the A-Gas Supercharged class at the Winter Nationals. It was about that time when Pittman seized the chance to campaign his own car on a full-time basis. So, Pittman left the team on good terms, joined by their crew chief, John Edwards, to build up his own race team. It may have seemed like a huge loss, and it was, but with every great loss comes great opportunity. And that opportunity was with a young local drag racer named Doug Cook. Cook was a phenomenal driver, consistent and fast, on top of being a great mechanic to boot. A native of Little Rock, Arkansas, he moved to the West Coast when he was a teen and spent his spare time at the Santa Ana drag strip. The 1963 season brought a big change in the form of a weight break for the A-Gas class, placing Swindler 2 at a disadvantage for the remainder of the season. However, they still managed to remain competitive, bringing home a class win at the Mickey Thompson event prior to the Winter Nationals. If they were to remain competitive, they needed a new car. So they built a new 41 Willys that was purpose-built for this new weight break for the 64 season. This new car was named Swindler A. It was 1,000 pounds lighter and powered by yet another blown 467 Olds. Swindler A was painted black for a brief time and earned the nickname Black Widow, although it was painted back to blue shortly thereafter. The Stone, Woods, and Cook team began the 1964 season with a win against Big John Mazmanian's Willys at the Winter Nats. Even though Cook won with a blistering 10:03 second quarter mile at 142 miles an hour, he just barely eked out the win over Mazmanian's driver, Bones Ballo. That was too close for comfort. It was apparent that their blown Olds engine was at its technological limits, and the Chrysler Hemi engine was really starting to make a name for itself at the drag strip. So, to remain competitive, they upgraded the Swindler cars with blown Chrysler Hemi engines. The Stone, Woods, and Cook team were highly respected among their peers. When these gearheads got together, it was all about racing and not about race, although race was still a big issue at the time. But for the most part, it was the racing that was a common denominator for all of them. The Stone, Woods, and Cook team was a unique partnership of blacks and whites during a time that it wasn't acceptable in society. While it was formed out of necessity, it continued in friendship. Basically, a race car owner couldn't drive their own car down the track, and a bunch of other racers stepped in so that they could see their car on the track, and it led to the first racially integrated and one of the most, if not the most popular gasser team ever. The Stone, Woods, and Cook families continued to remain friends, even after the original three have passed on. They were all pioneers for fighting against racial tyranny, but they weren't even trying to start a movement. They just did it. They were all good people doing good in the face of evil, and their efforts made them famous, not because they were seeking fame, but because it was just the right thing to do. God bless them all.